to Simple Sacred Home. My name is Paige, and today I'm going to be sharing the birth story for baby number 2. If you haven't seen my last couple of videos, I ended up sharing my birth plan, and then a video that I posted last week was all about prepping and preparing for our home birth. So if you're interested in seeing those videos, you can go ahead and watch those. I'll have them linked up here as well as in the description down below. Today I wanted to sit down and share the birth story. If you haven't seen the birth story for our first baby, I will link that down below as well, and you can watch that if you're interested. We were planning a natural, unmedicated home birth for this baby with my daughter, who I had last year. We ended up having a hospital birth, and I was planning an unmedicated birth, but I ended up getting Pitocin and an epidural. So that was my experience the first time around in the hospital setting. I guess we should just rewind with my daughter. I ended up going into labor with her at 40 weeks 5 days, and then I ended up having her at 40 weeks 6 days. So I had heard a lot from a lot of different resources that with your second, they typically come around the same time as your first, if not a little early, but obviously each baby is different, so you're not guaranteed that. But that was kind of in the back of my head, like, oh, I'll probably have her around 40 weeks, maybe a little bit early. And so I was doing pretty good. And then once I hit 41 weeks, I started to get pretty anxious because with my daughter, like when I was in the hospital setting, they ended up breaking my water right before I started pushing. And when they broke my water, they were like, you have like no fluid in here. Like I remember them noting that. And so I remember being a little freaked out by that because I was like, oh my gosh, she in there with not a lot of fluid, but luckily she was fine. I didn't really think about that much during this pregnancy, but I remember the day that I hit 41 weeks and I just immediately started remembering that I had low fluid with my daughter, and they couldn't give me a reason as to why I had low fluid. It wasn't something they noted earlier in pregnancy, so I had no idea how long I had low fluid for or what caused the low fluid. So I remember once I hit 41 weeks, I started to panic because I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm going longer with this baby than I did with my first. What if I have low fluid this time around? And I started to get pretty anxious about that. My midwife had recommended this specific test, basically this test that is recommended 41 weeks and after, where they do an ultrasound and they're looking for specific movements from your baby within a certain period of time. So there's certain milestones or things that your baby has to do within a certain amount of time, and they get graded on it. Basically, the test lets everyone know if baby is happy and healthy in there, or if there's reason to think that we need to try to get baby out. 41 weeks and 2 days. I got up super early. We got up at like 5 a.m. We had to drive about an hour away, and I had this ultrasound super early. It was like 7 a.m. The ultrasound technician did tell me, she said the measurements are usually not super reliable at this point because baby's so big, and so they can be off by like 2 weeks. So I come home and my midwife sends me the results, and she passed her tests with flying colors. So I was like, great, there's plenty of fluid, she's moving, she's doing everything that she's supposed to, she's happy in there. And so that gave me a lot of peace to be like, okay, we can wait it out a little bit longer. For me personally, I didn't feel comfortable going a day over 42 weeks. So I was like, if this baby's not here at 42 weeks, I'm going to the hospital because I want this baby out. The reason is there's just a higher risk of complications after that for baby, and I just didn't want to even risk that. So for me, it was a hard 42 weeks, I'm going to the hospital. But some of her measurements were like extremely off. Like they said her head was measuring like 36 weeks. Some of her other measurements were like 37 or 38 weeks. And then at the very end, they conclude like based on your measurements, how far along they think you are. And they said that I was like measuring 37 weeks. Obviously I was 41. So that's like a big discrepancy there because they said it can usually be off by like 2 weeks, but this was 4 weeks different. So even though she was passing all her tests and I was happy about that, then I was starting to panic because at the last ultrasound I had, they were saying her head was measuring big. Now it's saying her head's measuring 4 weeks behind. So I started to panic a little bit. So I knew she was healthy and safe to be in there. It wasn't like I needed to immediately evacuate her. But then I started to worry, like, is she not growing the way she's supposed to? But the ultrasound tech did say she was super, super low. And she kept saying that. So when I was Googling, which I don't recommend Googling, I still did. And it was saying that if the baby's head is too low in your pelvis, then it's really hard to get an accurate measurement. So they did the best that they could at getting a measurement, but because of how low she was, it just was very off. I remember texting my midwife, just letting her know, like, okay, I'm glad she's good in there and happy, but if I make it to 42 weeks, I want to be going into the hospital that day to have this baby. I do not want to wait a day after. My midwife was like, okay, we can do a couple things before we have to get to that point to try to get labor started naturally. We decided I was going to do a membrane sweep. I had a membrane sweep done the week of 40 weeks with my first daughter, and I think it took like several days to still go into labor, so I don't know if it worked or not, but I did have one with her. I was like, let's start with that to see if that like kind of kicks off things. My midwife had said she could do the membrane sweep if I wanted to do that. So I said, yes, let's do that. Because I heard that it can take like 24 to 48 hours if it's going to work to kickstart labor. And so this was all on a Thursday. By Tuesday, I would have been 42 weeks. So I was really trying to get things going because I'm like, if the membrane sweep does work, then by like Saturday or Sunday, I should have the baby. And that will obviously be before 42 weeks. And then if this doesn't work, like let's see what any other options we have are and see if we can try one or two of those before heading into the hospital. So my midwife actually was able to come out and do the sweep for me that same day on Thursday. So she came around 5 o'clock, she did the sweep, and then she left. And I just went about the rest of my evening. Because we woke up super early to go to the ultrasound, I remember my daughter went down to bed at like 7 or 7:30 that day. And I told my husband, I was like, we should really go to sleep like as soon as she goes down for bed, because if this sweep does do anything, like we might be up for a while. And so we went straight to bed, and I wasn't having like any cramping. I had a little bit of bleeding, but nothing to worry about. And so I went to bed. And around 1 o'clock, sometime in the 1 o'clock hour, I remember getting up to go to the bathroom, and you know, very common for end of pregnancy. And so I went to go to the bathroom, and I remember feeling like I have to go to the bathroom, okay? And without going into detail, I felt like I had to go to the bathroom. So I went in the bathroom, tried to go to the bathroom. I couldn't go to the bathroom. And I was like, that's really weird. So I went back into my room and I laid down, and I was trying to go back to sleep, and I felt fine. So it was weird because I felt like I had to go to the bathroom, tried to go to the bathroom, couldn't go to the bathroom, and then I felt like normal again, like I didn't have to go to the bathroom. So I laid back down, and then a few minutes later, I felt like this urge to go to the bathroom again, and I was like, that's so weird. I feel like I have to go to the bathroom, but then it goes away. And that's when I was like, oh, I wonder if this could be a contraction. So basically I laid in bed just to see, like, is this gonna keep happening? Is this a contraction or not? Because with my first daughter, I had all back labor, and so I didn't have any of that like period like cramping or anything like that. I just had back pain. And so this was also in my back, and like I said, it was this really intense urge to need to go to the bathroom. It wasn't like super clear. It wasn't like tightening in the front, which would make me automatically think it was contractions. It was one of those things like you have to really like pay attention. So I remember laying there, it was like 1:40 in the morning, and I remember having it happen a couple of times. So I was like, okay, I feel like totally normal, then I feel this urge to need to go to the bathroom, and then it subsides. So I decided, let me download the contraction app. It's basically this app where you just like press a button, it will start when you're starting a contraction, and then it measures how long the contraction is and how far apart they are. So I was like, let me just try to see if these are contractions by measuring them, see if there's any patterns, see how long they are, that kind of thing. So I was laying there and I kept having them. I had like 4 or 5, and I was like, this is definitely contractions. And it was crazy because this time around for this pregnancy, I did tons of research. I literally researched what feels like everything I possibly could have for birth and labor. And so you hear a lot about contractions like a wave. So basically it starts not too bad and then it works its way up and it goes to like a peak point and then it comes back down. And that is such a good description of how my contractions felt. While I didn't have contractions in the front of my stomach, they were all in my back, but I could literally, I don't know if it's because I had in the back of my mind the wave analogy or if it was just very evident that that's what it was, but I could literally feel the intensity going up and then it come back down, which was very crazy because I don't remember feeling that at all with my daughter. I was tracking them and I was like, okay, these are definitely contractions, but I'm super early, obviously. I don't remember, I think they were starting at like 10 minutes apart, but they were moving from like 10 to 8 minutes apart. I would have some that were like a minute long, but then I'd have some that were like 38 seconds. And my midwife's rule of thumb was if it's your second or subsequent birth, you're going to have the 5-1-1 rule. So you're going to want contractions that are 5 minutes apart, lasting 1 minute for at least an hour. And then if that's happening, then that's when you would call the midwife if it's in the middle of the night. So obviously this was the middle of the night, and so I was like, okay, they're not 5 minutes apart, they're not all lasting a minute long, and this wasn't happening for an hour yet. So I was like, I'm just going to lay back down and try to rest. So I was laying back down, trying to rest, trying to fall back asleep, but I could tell based on how the contractions were that I wasn't really able to sleep through them because I just had this extreme urge to go to the bathroom. So I kept wanting to get up to go to the bathroom, thinking I had to go to the bathroom, but I didn't. And so at that point, because I was having all of this back pain and that's what I had with my daughter, I really wanted to try to see if I could get the baby in the optimal position. And so I had heard that doing the mile circuit in early labor is really helpful at trying to turn the baby. So my thought process was, okay, I'm having back labor right now, it's still early labor, so if I do the mile circuit now while I'm in early labor and the contractions aren't super intense yet, then maybe I can get her to move and then I'll have contractions in the front and hopefully that will speed up my labor, because sometimes with back labor, if they're not in the ideal position, it can just make labor take longer because they need more contractions to get them to move. So that's what I did. I came out of the bedroom, I came out here, and my plan was to have the home birth in my daughter's playroom back here. So all of her toys were just like sprawled out all over the floor. So I remember having those early contractions and like picking up her toys in between. And then once I picked up all of her toys and everything was like looking good, I decided to do the mile circuit. I put on some music in my headphones, or I watched a YouTube video, I can't remember. The first position right there on the floor, and then I ended up using the peanut ball for the second position, and I ended up going into our room to do that. And I just laid in the bed and I put the peanut ball in between my legs for the exaggerated side lying position, I think it's called. And I remember when I was doing the peanut ball exercise that the contractions were feeling super intense in that position. Like they were definitely getting stronger. And so while in the first position it was pretty easy to go through the contractions, I remember being really uncomfortable in the second position because I was laying down and I had the peanut ball in between my legs. So I did that position. You hold each of these positions for 30 minutes. So that's what I was doing. And then the third position, I ended up doing hip circles on the birth ball. I didn't feel her move or anything like that. So I'm like, okay, maybe she's not gonna move right now, but at least I did it. And I was just counting my contractions using the app to keep track of them. They were getting closer together. They were getting down to like, they went from like 10 to 8 to 6. Some of them were like over a minute long. So I had some that were a minute and 8 seconds. Then I had others that were like 52 seconds. Then I had some that were like 38 seconds. So they weren't super consistent in terms of length, but I was wanting to track them, so I had a general idea of where I was at. I remember 4 o'clock came around and I told my husband, I was like, these are starting to get closer together. were down to like 6 minutes apart, which is almost 5 minutes apart. I was like, some of them are over a minute long, but then some of them aren't a minute long. And this was going on from like 1:47 in the morning to 4 a.m. So I was telling my husband, I was like, I think I should call the midwife. What do you think based on the contractions? And my husband was like, I think you still have time. Like, it hasn't been a full hour of them at 5 minutes apart. They're not all over a minute long. And so I think you still have time. So I was like, okay, I'm going to try. My home birth midwife's rule was to call only if you met certain criteria. If it was before 7 a.m., so anytime before 7 a.m., you would call only under certain criteria. And then if it was the daytime, you could like just text with updates if you like weren't sure where you were at. So my thought process was, okay, it's 4. If I can make it to 7, then I can just text her my current contractions so she can see like how close they are, and maybe she can help me decide if she should come or not, because I really didn't want to call her in the middle of the night to come out if I wasn't ready or near, like close, and I thought I was nowhere near having a baby. So but as they were getting closer together, once they started getting like 6 minutes apart, that's when I started being like, okay, they're 6 minutes apart. Some of them are lasting over a minute long. It's been close to an hour, but I was just trying to wait it out. So I remember texting my doula at 4 a.m. because my doula hadn't given me like instructions like don't text in the middle of the night or something. So I was like, maybe I can ask her opinion. So I texted her, and what's nice about the contraction timer is that you can send like a PDF to whoever you want to send it to. And so I was able to just like click a button and it sent all of my contractions over to my doula. So that's what I did. And I was just like, hey, like, do you think I should call the midwife? Like, she has the 511 rule. They're not exactly following that pattern yet, but they're like kind of close. And as much as I wanted to have a home birth, I did not want to have a free birth, which, if you don't know, a free birth is when you don't have a midwife present. So I was like, I don't want to call the midwife too early and be that person, but I also don't want to have this baby without a midwife present. So I was really just like struggling to know when to call. And so I had told my midwife, I was like, they're pretty manageable. Like, I'm managing them pretty well, but every once in a while I'll have like a pretty intense one. And so my doula was like, yeah, like you can totally call your midwife. I don't think she would mind hearing from you, but I think you do have some time. So maybe just try to rest if you can, try to relax through them, and keep me updated. I was like, okay. So that was at 4 o'clock. And then I just remember from 4 to 6, just continuing to labor through them. And like I said, I would have some pretty intense ones, but then I'd have ones that weren't too bad. And that's what was like hard for me to navigate. Like, this has to be super early labor, but also some of them are like pretty intense, and they were growing closer together. Okay, so then at, I remember 6 o'clock, I told my husband, I was like, I really think that we should call the midwife. They're getting really close together. At this point, I was having some that were like 2.5 minutes apart, so under 5 minutes, right? But I would have one that was like 6 minutes apart, and then I'd have one that was like 2 minutes apart, and some of them were still like 38 seconds, but then some of them were like a minute and 5 seconds, a minute and 8 seconds. But it was making me nervous that I was having ones that were like 2.5 minutes apart, because if this is closer than I'm thinking it is, like that's really close. And so my husband was like, I think we can wait a little bit longer. And I was like, okay. So basically I was just trying to get to that 7 o'clock mark. And then I remember at 6:30, I got up and I was like, I'm gonna go in the shower to try to get some relief. So I went in the shower, and I remember having a really hard couple in the shower. And at like 6:45, I called my husband and I said, please call the midwife, because I just have a feeling like I want you to call her. I just had this really urge to call her. And I was like, I know it's not 7 yet, but it's close enough to 7 that I'd rather her know now. The contractions were pretty uncomfortable, so I was like, I'm not talking to her, so you're gonna call her. My husband called, and the midwife was like, okay, I'm on my way. She headed over, my doula headed over, and at this point I had stopped counting my contractions, so I didn't know how close together they were anymore. I was really like in the zone. And I just remember thinking, oh my gosh, I was convinced I was like super early into labor. So I was like, I don't think I'm going to be able to do this. It just was this constant feeling of needing to go to the bathroom with this intense back pain, like intense back pressure, I would call it. It was painful, but it was like this really intense pressure feeling. And so anyway, my midwife ended up showing up. I had no idea at this point what time it was, but I later found out she got there around 7:30, so she got there super fast. And then my doula showed up right after that, and they just monitored baby. They were checking in on me. I was trying to just find comfortable positions, so I would try to labor on the birth ball, the toilet, the bed. A lot of them I found the only thing that really helped was kind of like leaning over onto something, and then I had my husband do counter pressure on my hips, which was super helpful. That was like the only thing, that and the shower, that really took the edge off. It was still uncomfortable, but it was a lot more manageable when that was happening. This whole time I also just had my Christian hypnobirthing in, but it was really crazy because I was able to go through the contraction. It was really hard, but when I wasn't having the contraction, I felt totally fine and normal, and I had so much relief. And I didn't experience that really with my daughter. I don't think I let myself get into like the right mentality. Oh, this is uncomfortable. But this time around I was like, okay, all you have to do is do this for a minute, and then it'll be done, and you'll get a break, and you'll feel good, and then you'll just have to do it again, and you're just gonna stay present in the moment, dealing with what's right in front of you. And so that's what I did. And at this point, because we were using the shower to fill the pool, I didn't have the access to the shower anymore, which is the only thing that I would have liked to be able to do. We only have one shower, so that was the only connecting point for filling the tub. So I just kind of had to deal with that. But I would have loved to do more contractions in the shower because it really did feel pretty good. Once they said I could get in the pool, I was like, please, because I knew how much it took the edge off by getting in the shower, so I knew that getting in the pool would probably help with that as well. Once I got in the pool, it felt like I was not in there very long. I don't think I was in there very long. I think I was probably in there for like an hour, but it felt like the quickest hour of my life, honestly. I just remember I was apologizing to my midwife because I'm like, I'm so sorry to call you guys to have you come out this early. I didn't even know what time it was at this point. It was not that early, but I was convinced this was going to be like an all day thing. So my midwife was like, no, you're definitely in active labor. And I was like, how can you tell? And she's like, this is my job. She hadn't checked me, so we didn't know for a fact, but she was like, no, you're definitely in active labor based on how you're acting. But I just remember thinking, like, what if I'm just being extra and I'm not as far along as they think I am? And so I remember just being worried about that. But I got in the pool and I labored in the pool. It felt really good to sit like back and kind of just relax when I wasn't having a contraction. But when I was having a contraction, I had to get up onto my knees. That was the only way that it felt comfortable, or more comfortable than any other position. And so I did that. And yeah, I just had this the whole time. Every single contraction, I just had this urge to go to the bathroom. Okay. That's the only way I know how to describe it. I think I kept telling them, like, every single time I had a contraction, I just need to go to the bathroom. I just need to go to the bathroom. And really, my midwife was they would check on baby's heart rate. She's like, if you feel the need to go to the bathroom, you can try to go to the bathroom. And I would, and I'd be like, I can't go. Like, I don't know why. And she just said, if you feel like you need to push, you can push. And so that's kind of what we did. I would push if I felt the urge to push, and if I didn't feel the urge to push, I wouldn't. I remember pushing, and I could tell it went from this feeling of needing to go to the bathroom to, oh, there's a baby. Like, I can feel the baby at this point. And so I think I pushed, like, I don't remember how many times I pushed. It felt like very few times. I think it was maybe like 2 or 3 or 4 times. But I remember pushing once and feeling the baby's head. And then when the contraction stopped and I stopped pushing, the baby's head went back up, which is totally common and normal. But I was like, oh, it's the baby's head. Like, I could clearly tell that's what it was. And like I said, within a couple of pushes, she came out. It was crazy. And she came out, and the midwife helped bring her up to me, and I was able to pull her up onto my chest. She was born at 9:41 in the morning. So my midwives got there at like 7:30, and by 9:41 I had her. It's crazy because, like I said, all these contractions started at like 1:47 in the morning, but from 1:47 to 9:41, it was like the quickest time ever. You really do go into like this time warp. It was the craziest thing ever. I was so special and sweet, and I cannot describe how grateful I am to God. I didn't have any tearing. Baby was healthy. I was healthy. Praise God. Like, every single prayer that I prayed was answered. Every single one. And I'm just so beyond grateful. This experience has forever changed me and provided me with so much gratitude for how God designed our bodies. And I could talk about it all day. It was the coolest experience of my entire life. I would do it 100 times over again. It was so cool. If you have ever wanted to do a home birth, I highly recommend looking into it. Obviously, make sure you find a provider that you trust and that has the experience and you feel like you know for a fact they're going to be a good fit for you. But if you find that, I highly recommend having a home birth. It was the coolest thing ever. And I'm so glad I didn't just give up and just go the hospital route, because I think I would have always looked back and said, like, could I have done it? And now I can say, yeah, you did do it. And I did it with the help of the Lord. And it was just so cool. It was such a cool experience. I can't even put into words. It's so funny because I obviously wanted to do it. And so I was planning on doing it, and I had everything set, and I was telling my husband, I was like, these are the things to say to me, because there's no backing out. Like, there's no going to the hospital unless there was an emergency, obviously, but there's no like, oh, I don't want to do this anymore, let's go to the hospital. But until you actually do it, right, like, you don't really know what's gonna end up happening. And so I just keep telling myself, like, I can't believe I did it. Like, I cannot believe, like, I know I wanted to do it and that was the plan, but I can't even believe that I was able to do it. It was just the coolest experience, hands down, ever. And talk about empowering, talk about redemptive. It was just so beautiful. My postpartum experience has been completely different this time around versus last time. Everything about it has been so beautiful, and it was hard, but the best type of hard. Quote that I say all the time, and I've said this since my daughter was born, my first daughter, who's a toddler now. I heard Abby Halberstadt, I think is her name. She has a book called Hard is Not the Same Thing as Bad. That is the best quote ever for a mom. That's the best quote ever for going through labor and pregnancy and birth, is hard is not the same thing as bad, because it's so easy when you're going through something uncomfortable or painful or challenging to associate that with hard, and then associating that hard with being bad. Those are not the same thing. Something can be hard, but it can be rewarding. Don't equate something that's hard with something that's bad. Anything good in life usually requires some kind of patience, sacrifice, challenge. And once you overcome those things, that's when you can see the beauty and be grateful for the experience. And that's just 100% how I feel. I think also just like being in the comfort of my own home, having done so much mental prep for my brain and my mind, and just relying on the Lord, it just completely changed how I viewed labor and birth this time around versus with my first. And so, yeah, I'm so happy. I wish I could put into words how excited I am that I was able to do that. But yeah, she was born at 41 weeks and 3 days, born at home. It was the sweetest day ever, and I'm so grateful that I got to do it, and I would do it, like I said, a million times over. But I hope you guys enjoyed this birth story. I am so passionate about home birth. I'm so passionate about birth in general after taking this last 9 months of really like doing so much research, digging in, really trying to prepare myself as much as I possibly can for a natural birth, an unmedicated birth, and a home birth. So if you guys have any specific questions about home birth, natural, unmedicated birth, overall my thoughts on a hospital birth versus having a home birth, or anything like that, let me know what questions you have down below, and I would love to do like a separate Q&A video or something where I can answer those questions. And if there's enough questions, maybe there's even certain topics I can elaborate and do full videos on. Hope you guys enjoyed this video, and I will see you in the next one.